Grace of the Master. Perfection is the goal of human life, but human efforts are very limited. Happiness does not come merely through human endeavor, but comes through grace. Blessed are those who have the grace of both God and Master. Guru is a stream and a channel of knowledge. The word guru is so misused that I feel hurt sometimes. It is such a noble word, such a wonderful word. After your mother has given birth to you, and your parents have raised you, then the role of the guru begins, and he helps you fulfill the purpose of your life. Even if I'm a very bad man, and somebody calls me guru, I have to become the best for the sake of the person who expects it of me. A guru is different from a teacher. Guru is a compound of two words, gu and ru. Gu means darkness, ru means light. That which dispels the darkness of ignorance is called guru. In the West, the word guru is often misused. In India, this word is used with reverence, and is always associated with holiness and the highest wisdom. It is a very sacred word. It is seldom used by itself, but always with its suffix, deva. Deva means bright being. An enlightened master or guru is called Guru Deva. There is a vast difference between an ordinary teacher and a spiritual master. All followers of a guru, whatever their age, even if they are 80 years old, are like children to him. He will feed them, give them shelter, and then teach them, without expecting anything in return. I asked my master, "Why does he do this?" He said, "He has no other desires but teaching those aspirants who are prepared. If he doesn't do this, what shall he do?" When a student goes to a guru, he takes a bundle of dry sticks. With reverence and love, he bows and says, "Here, I offer this." That indicates that he is surrendering himself with all his mind, action, and speech, with a single desire to attain the highest wisdom. The guru burns those sticks and says, "Now I will guide you and protect you in the future." Then he initiates the student on various levels and gives him the discipline to practice it. It is such a pure relationship that I don't think any other relationship is even comparable. Everything the guru has, even his body, mind, and soul, belongs to his student. But if he has any odd habits at all, they belong only to himself. The guru imparts a word and says, "This will be an eternal friend to you. Remember this word. It will help you." That is called mantra initiation. Then he explains how to use the mantra. He removes obstacles. Since the student has desires and many problems, he does not know how to make decisions properly. So the guru will teach him how to decide and how to remain peaceful and tranquil. He will say, "Sometimes you have noble thoughts, but you do not bring them into action. Come on, make your mind one-pointed. You are powerful, and my blessings are with you." You try your best to do something for him, but you cannot, because he doesn't need anything. Such a compassionate one spontaneously attracts your attention, for you are bewildered. You wonder, Why is he doing so much for me? What does he want from me? He wants nothing, for what he is doing is his duty, the purpose of his life. If he guides you, he is not obliging you. He is doing his work. He cannot live without doing his duty. Such people are called gurus. They guide humanity. As the sun shines and lives far above, the guru gives his spiritual love and remains unattached. Guru is not a physical being. Those who think of the guru as a body or as a man do not understand this pious word. If a guru comes to think that his power is his own, then he is a guide and no more. The guru is tradition. He is a stream of knowledge. That stream of knowledge goes through many channels. Christ also said this when he healed people and they called him Lord. He said, "This is because of my Father. I am only a channel." No human being can ever become a guru. But when a human being allows himself to be used as a channel for receiving and transmitting by the power of powers, then it happens. And for that, a human being should learn to be selfless. Usually love is mingled with selfishness. I need something, so I say, "I love you." You need something, so you love me. This is what we call love in the world. But when you do actions selflessly in a spontaneous way, then that is real love. You don't expect any reward. Genuine gurus cannot live without selflessness. For selfless love is the very basis of their enlightenment. They radiate life and light from the unknown corners of the world. The world does not know them, and they do not want recognition. Don't ever believe anyone who comes to you and demands, "Worship me." Even Christ and Buddha did not ask that. Never forget that Guru is not the goal. Guru is like a boat for crossing the river. It is very important to have a good boat, and it is very dangerous to have a boat that is leaking. But after you have crossed the river, you don't need to hang on to your boat, and you certainly don't worship the boat. Many fanatics think they should worship a guru. A guru should receive your love and respect. That is different from worship. If my guru and the Lord both come together, I will go to my guru first and say, "Thank you very much. You have introduced me to the Lord." I will not go to the Lord and say, "Thank you very much, Lord. You have given me my guru." A weeping statue. I often visited Uttar Vrindavan, an ashram in the Himalayas, and did satsanga with Krishna Prem, a Professor Nixon, and Anand Bhikkhu, or Dr. Alexander. These two Europeans, one of whom had been a professor of English and the other a professor of medicine, were disciples of Yashoda Ma, a female mystic from Bengal. They lived quietly, avoiding visitors. During those days, Krishna Prem was writing two books. One was The Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, and the other, The Yoga of Kathopanishad. These were later published in London. They had sufficient funds to meet their daily expenses, so they were not dependent on others. Their way of living was very simple, neat and clean. They were very particular in cooking their meals, not allowing anyone to come into their kitchen. By then Yashoda Ma had left her body, and they had built a memorial to her, called Samadhi. At the top of the monument A beautiful marble statue of Krishna had been installed. On one of my visits, shortly after the statue was installed, I noticed that Krishna Prem was wearing something on his arm. I asked him about it, and he said, "You won't believe me." I said, "Please explain it to me." He replied, "You intellectualize everything, and I'm afraid you might think I have gone crazy. But I will tell you. 15 days ago the statue of Krishna, which was installed on the memorial, started flowing tears. The tears dripped from the statue continuously. We dismantled the base of the statue to see if there was any source of the seeping water, but found nothing. There was no way that water could come up through the statue and flow from its eyes. When we put the statue back in place, the tears began to flow once more. This made me very sad. I decided that I must be committing some mistake in my sadhana, and that Ma was not happy with me. To keep myself ever reminded of this, I took some cotton, soaked it in the tears, and put it in the locket which I am now wearing on my arm. What I'm telling you is true, and I know why this is happening. Don't tell anyone about this. They will think I've gone insane." I said, "I don't doubt your integrity. Please explain to me why it occurs." He said, "The Guru guides from the other side in many ways. This is an instruction to me. I have become lazy. Instead of doing my evening sadhana, I have been retiring early. It was her habit to remind us whenever we fell into the grip of sloth and missed our practice. This has to be the right explanation." He became very serious and then started to sob. His love for his Guru was immense, and this inspired me. Love for Guru is the first rung on the ladder to the divine, but this love is not love for the human form. People in India, except for the Brahmins, greatly admired these two European Swamis, Krishna Prem and his brother disciple Anand Bhikkhu. The Brahmins did not treat them well, though. They were more pure and spiritually advanced than many of the temple priests. Whenever they visited any temple, they were considered to be untouchables. I condemned those Brahmins, and often would tell my two friends that out of ignorance many people have become fanatic, and fanaticism is not part of any religion. India has suffered from the caste system, just as the West has suffered from the race and class systems. Both are injurious for human society. My master's photograph. I committed a breach of trust with my master when I met in September 1939 two photographers from France who had traveled to the Himalayas to take pictures. I wanted them to take a picture of my master. I had a few rupees in my pocket, which I gave to the photographers, and I borrowed 150 more to get the amount they wanted. Then I led them over a narrow wooden bridge across the Ganges to a small hut where my master and I had been staying for 15 days. When my master saw the photographers, he looked at me and said, "You are a bad boy. Why must you be so obstinate? They will have nothing." I didn't understand. Sometimes I stubbornly thought my master was my property. The photographers each took a roll of pictures with their separate cameras. Inserting 2 new rolls, they asked me to sit next to my master so they could take some pictures of the two of us together. This time my master sealed his lips and closed his eyes. In all, 4 rolls of pictures were taken with 2 separate cameras from 3 o'clock to 5:30 in the afternoon. After taking a few more pictures of the mountains, the photographers left for Delhi. When my pictures were developed and returned, I could not believe the results. Everything around where my master had been sitting appeared in the pictures, but my master's image did not appear at all. On 3 or 4 other occasions I attempted to get a picture of my master, but he always said, "A picture of the mortal body might obstruct your vision of the light within me. You should not be attached to my mortal body. Be aware of our divine link." Later, before I started traveling abroad in Europe and then in Japan, he told me, "I don't want you to sell me to the Western market." I have respected his feelings and have never made any attempt to make a reprint of the only photograph of my master in existence. My brother disciple got this one photograph from a cameraman of Srinagar, who had taken it with a box camera. It is possible for a yogi to put a veil between himself and the camera, so that he does not appear in the photograph, but for some reason on that one occasion my master did not do so. Who can kill the eternal? Once in the mountains a landslide started rumbling toward us. I cried, "We are going to die!" My master said, "Who can kill the eternal?" I said, "The mountain is coming down, and you say, 'Who can kill the eternal?' Look at the mountain!" He shouted, "Stop! Let us cross!" and the landslide stopped. Then we passed that place and he said, "Now you can fall down," and the landslide continued. On another occasion some people were following him when he was going toward the mountain. It started snowing, and it snowed constantly for 3 hours. People did not have enough clothing. So they said, "Sir, you are considered to be eternal. It is said that you have miraculous powers. Why do you not stop this snow?" He said, "It's easy." Then he said in a loud voice, "Stop, and let the sun shine." And it happened. The power of will force is very little known among modern men. There are 3 channels of power. One is called Kriya Shakti, another is called Ichcha Shakti, and the third is called Jnana Shakti. Shakti is that force which manifests itself through these 3 channels. This power may be either latent or active. With the help of Kriya Shakti, we do our actions. With Ichcha Shakti, we will to act. And with Jnana Shakti, we decide to act. One can cultivate one or another aspect of this force. Some yogis learn to perform their actions skillfully and become successful in the world. Others develop their willpower and then direct their speech and actions in accord with their will. Some sharpen buddhi, the faculty of discrimination, and attain a state of prajna, a unified state of tranquility. The discipline undertaken differs according to the aspect of Shakti which is being developed, though discipline is necessary in each case. Developing Ichcha Shakti strengthens willpower, and with the help of willpower one can have command over the phenomenal world exactly as one has command over his limbs. It was through this power that my master was able to control the forces of nature. Half here, half there. Once I was staying with my master in a shrine on a bank of the Ganges River. We were at Karnaprayag. My master wears almost no clothing because he is hardly aware of his physical self. He is always in inner joy. Suddenly at night he said, "Let's go now." It was dark, and it had been raining outside for some time. I thought, if I say no, he will start walking anyway. He will just go like a lord with nothing on. So I put a blanket over him, hooked it with a thorn, and started to walk with him. It was bitterly cold. After going barefoot for half a mile, my whole body was freezing. I was wearing very little, only one woolen blanket. I wondered, what shall I do? After we had walked for 2 miles, we came to a crossroads, and I asked, "Do you know which way to go here?" He said, "This way." But I turned him around and said, "No, no, this is the way." So we reversed directions and returned to the very place from where we had set out. It was dark, and he did not know where he was. I said, "Now we have to stay here." He said, "Okay." I took my blanket off, laid it out, and he sat down near the fire. In the morning he opened his eyes and started giggling. He said, "We walked all night and are still in the same place. How is it possible?" I said, "I tricked you." "Why?" I said, "It was freezing and you were not aware of it." He used to enjoy such experiences. In that high state of ecstasy, he was often oblivious to the mundane things of the world, but when he became aware of them, he would enjoy them like a joyous child. At another time, I had a very strange experience with my master. It was a sunny June day in the forest near Varanasi, where the temperature goes up to 114 degrees. Since that day was very warm, I asked my master, "Will you take a bath?" He said, "Okay." Often you will come across wells in India when you travel from one city to another. If you want to take a bath, you will find someone nearby who has a bucket and a rope. Then you draw water from the well, take a bath, and go on. We came upon such a well, so I said, "Please sit down and wait. I'll go and get a bucket and a rope." When I returned, he was not there. I shouted for him, and heard someone answering from the bottom of the well, which was about 60 feet deep. He had jumped in and was playing in the water. Normally, if someone jumped from 60 feet, he would be injured. But in a high state of ecstasy, one is a child of nature and is protected. It became a problem for me because he wouldn't come out. I could not coax him out, so I asked some people from the village to help. 3 people came, and we threw down a basket with a rope tied to it. I shouted, "Sit in the basket, and we will pull you out." He answered, "Leave me alone. Let me take my bath." He was enjoying himself. Then they tied me with the rope and lowered me down into the well. I said, "Come on." But he said, "Let me take my bath." He was still playing there. I told him, "It's been almost 1 hour now. You've had enough bath." "Have I?" "Yes." Finally, after a long time, I convinced him to come out. Every day he would take a bath, but his mind would be somewhere else. I would say, "Now you have taken your bath, come out." He lived most of the time there, in a constant state of bliss, and very little of the time here, conscious of the mundane world. How a young widow was rescued. Once, in a desert village of Rajasthan, 50 miles west of Pilani, there lived a landlord who had only one son. Just after his wedding ceremony, the boy died of a high fever. His poor young widow, who was very beautiful and hardly 17 years of age, was not able to enjoy her honeymoon. In certain communities the law is, once married, married forever, and widows cannot remarry. This system was changed by a movement called Arya Samaj. The founder of this movement was Swami Dayananda, who was a great leader of socio-religious reform. This young girl preferred to lead a holy life and lived in a room which was on the second story of her father-in-law's brick building. In her room were 2 pictures. Beside these, the girl had only one blanket which she used as a mattress, and another to protect herself from the cold. There was a widow in the back of that room, and a door made of strong, thick wood in the front. One night 3 fully armed men came to rob that house. Their intention was to rape and kidnap this young widow. They locked all the members of her family in one room and wanted to break into her room. When she discovered this, she started praying, "Gurudeva, I am pure. Save me, protect me. Where are your protective arms? What has happened to you?" Suddenly, an old, white-haired man with a beard appeared on a camel's back at her rear window. He said, "Come with me, my child, otherwise you are in danger. You'll be raped by them, and you'll be disgraced, and finally commit suicide." The robbers were very disappointed when they found, after breaking down the door, that there was no one inside. The girl and her rescuer traveled all night on the camel, and before sunrise arrived safely at her father's house, which was 65 miles away. I visited this village in 1951 and heard the story from that very woman, who was known for her purity and spirituality. After narrating her story, she asked me many questions about my master. Her father was known to us. He had a divine link with our tradition. Through our conversation I discovered that the 2 pictures the girl had in her room were of Mirabai and of my master. Her whole family worshipped his picture, which my brother disciple had given to her father after he had completed a journey from the Himalayas. The face of her rescuer was the same as the one in her photograph. It was my master. I wanted to see my master's picture, and I liked it so much that I took it from her with the promise that I would send her a copy of it. But for many reasons I could not do so. This is the only picture of my master in existence. There is no doubt in my mind and heart as to the truth of this experience. How it happened, however, I have no way to explain. By telling this story, I do not want to build a guru cult, but want to make you aware that the ways of the masters are very mysterious, and that they help their students from any corner of the world, even from the other side of the world. Physical presence is not always necessary for the teacher to help, guide, and protect his student. My master saves a drowning man. A learned man from Rajasthan once came to my ashram at Uttarkashi. He was a well-known pundit. He was on a pilgrimage to Gangotri in the Himalayas. He was then about 70 years of age. One day he wanted to take a dip in the holy Ganges river, but did not know how to swim. The river was just a short distance from my ashram. He saw that monkeys on the other bank of the river were jumping into the water, diving and coming up. So he thought, if monkeys can dive in and swim, why can't I, an educated man, do it? Thereupon he jumped into the water and started drowning. One of my companions saw him drowning and began shouting. I rushed out and asked, "What happened?" He replied, "That man is drowning." I rushed to the river. I was worried. I thought, is someone going to be killed in front of my ashram? When I got there, the old man was sitting on the bank, gasping for air. After he caught his breath, I asked him what had happened. He said, "I was taken by the currents." "Then how did you get out?" I asked. He said, "A Swami pulled me out." I asked him who it was, and he gave an exact description of my master. I had only one picture of my master and never showed it to anyone, but in this case I wanted to verify whether it was indeed my master who had pulled him out, so I showed that picture to him. He said, "Yes, that's the man." After I had gone under 3 times, I went down to the bottom and started inhaling water. I thought, if this is a holy place, somebody will help me. And then suddenly someone pulled me out of the water, and he is the very one. I told him, "You were hallucinating." He said, "No, I have so much faith now that I must find this man and stay with him. I shall never go back home." I asked, "What will your family say?" He said, "My children have grown up. I'm going to the Himalayas." And he left. My Guru Deva sent word to him on the way not to come until he was better prepared. Now he lives some 12 miles away from our monastery, where he spends his time in meditation. When I left for the West, he was still waiting to see my master. He says, "The day I am prepared, I'll go and see him." Shaktipata, bestowing bliss. I was preoccupied with the desire to experience samadhi. My master had told me, unless you sit completely still for 4 hours, you will never realize samadhi. So I practiced sitting from childhood on. More than anything else, my time was spent sitting to experience samadhi, but I failed to attain it. After studying many books, I became a teacher, but I felt that it was no good to impart second-hand or indirect knowledge. It would be better to teach philosophy in the university and elsewhere than to teach monks in the monastery in this way, I thought. This is not right. I am not realized. I only teach what I have studied through books and what I have learned from teachers, rather than what I have experienced. So one day I said to my master, "Today I am going to give you an ultimatum." He said, "What is this?" "Either you give me samadhi or I will commit suicide." I was really determined. He asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes." Then he calmly said, "My dear boy, go right ahead." I never expected him to say that. I had expected him to say, "Wait for 10 or 15 days." He had never been rude to me, But that day he was very rude. He said, "Going to sleep at night does not solve your problems. You will have to face them the next day. In the same way, committing suicide will not solve your real problems either. You will have to face them in your next life. You have studied the ancient scriptures, and you understand these things. Yet, you are talking about committing suicide? But if you really want to, go ahead." I always used to hear about Shaktipata. Shakti means energy. Pata means bestowing. Shaktipata means bestowing the energy, lighting the lamp. I said, "You have not done Shaktipata for me, so it means either you don't have Shakti or you don't intend to do it." For so long now I have been closing my eyes in meditation, and I end up with nothing but a headache. My time has been a waste, and I find little joy in life. He didn't say anything, so I continued. "I worked hard and sincerely. You said it would take 14 years. This is my 17th year of practice, and whatever you have asked me to do, I have done." He said, "Are you sure? Are you really following the practices I have taught you? Is this the fruit of my teaching, that you are committing suicide?" Then he asked, "When do you want to commit suicide?" I said, "Right now. I am talking to you before I commit suicide. You are no longer my master now. I gave up everything. I am of no use to the world. I am of no use to you." I got up to go to the Ganges to drown myself. The river was quite near. He said, "You know how to swim, so when you jump in the Ganges, naturally you will start swimming. You'd better find some way so that you will start drowning and not come up. Perhaps you should tie some weight to yourself." He was teasing me. I said, "What has happened to you? You used to love me so much." Then I said, "Now I am going. Thank you." I went to the Ganges with a rope and tied some big rocks to myself. Finally, when he noticed that I was indeed serious and was ready to jump, he called and said, "Wait. Sit down there, and in 1 minute I will give you samadhi." I did not know if he really meant it, but I thought, I can at least wait for a minute to see. I sat down in my meditation posture, and he came and touched me on the forehead. I remained in that position for 9 hours, and did not have a single worldly thought. The experience was indescribable. When I returned to normal consciousness, I thought it was still 9 o'clock in the morning, for samadhi annihilates time. I begged, "Sir, please forgive me." The first thing that I lost with that touch was fear, and I also found that I was no longer selfish. My life was transformed. After that I started understanding life properly. Later I questioned my master. I asked, "Was it my effort or your effort?" He replied, "Grace." What does grace mean? People think that by grace of God alone they will be enlightened. That is not the case. My master said a human being should make all possible sincere efforts. When he has become exhausted and then cries out in despair in that highest state of devotional emotion, he will attain ecstasy. That is the grace of God. Grace is the fruit that you receive from your faithful and sincere efforts. I now realize that Shaktipata is only possible with a disciple who has gone through a long period of discipline, austerity, and spiritual practices. Shaktipata on a mass scale seems suspicious to me. It is true that when the disciple is ready, the master appears and gives the appropriate initiation. When a student has done his sadhana with all faithfulness, truthfulness, and sincerity, then the subtlest obstacle is removed by the master. The experience of enlightenment comes from the sincere effort of both master and disciple. Let us put it in different words. When you have done your duty skillfully and wholeheartedly, you reap the fruits gracefully. Grace dawns when action ends. Shaktipata is the grace of God through the Master. I eagerly anticipate the times when I can be alone at night and sit in meditation and experience that state. Nothing else even approaches being so enjoyable. My Grandmaster in Sacred Tibet. In 1939, I wanted to go to Tibet. The border was only 9 miles from where I lived with my master, but I was not allowed to cross through Mana Pass and go to Tibet. 7 years later, I made another attempt. Early in 1946, I started a journey to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, via Darjeeling, Kalimpong, Sikkim, Pidong, Gyansi, and Shigasti. My main purpose in going to Tibet was to see my Grandmaster, my master's master, and to learn certain advanced practices under his guidance. I stayed a few days in Darjeeling and gave some public lectures. The British officers thought I was a rebel who wanted to go to Lhasa to disturb the British government in India. They knew about my plans for the journey, but did not know my motives. After 10 days I left for Kalimpong and stayed in the monastery where I had learned Kung Fu and other similar arts when I was young. After staying with my old teacher of Kung Fu, I went to Sikkim and stayed with a close relative of the Dalai Lama of Tibet. In Sikkim, the political officer, Mr. Hopkinson, was afraid that I would prejudice the minds of the administrators in Tibet against the British. I had several meetings with him, but he wouldn't permit me to go to Tibet. He suspected me of being a spy for the Indian Congress Party, which was then fighting the British government. There were 2 groups in India at that time. One was Mahatma Gandhi's group, which practiced non-violence and used the methods of passive resistance and non-cooperation. The other was the Terrorist Party of India. I was not a member of either, but the political officer found 2 letters in my possession, one written by Pandit Nehru and another from Mahatma Gandhi. These letters were non-political, but they caused the political officer to be even more suspicious, and I was put under house arrest and forced to stay in an inspection bungalow, which was a government house usually used for traveling inspectors or officials. I had every comfort, but for 2 months I could not leave the house, write to anyone, nor have visitors. The political officer said, "I can't prove you have done anything, but I suspect you of being a political spy. Until I get reports about you, you are not to leave." There was a guard outside the bungalow day and night. At least the time which I spent there gave me the opportunity to study the Tibetan language, so I would be better able to converse with the Tibetans if and when I was able to get into their country. In spite of my continuing requests to various officials, the political officer did not receive any orders to release me. So after 2 months, I decided that I would go secretly. I bought a long coat from one of the guards, it was very old and dirty, and tried to disguise my face. At 11 o'clock on a cold night, when the guard on duty was drunk and fast asleep, I left for Pidong, wearing my long Tibetan coat. It was July 15th when I left. Before I left, I placed a note on the table in my room saying that I was leaving for Delhi. This did not bother my conscience, because I felt that the administration was not justified in preventing my going to Tibet. It took me 3 days to get to the last checkpoint, where Gurkha soldiers were posted by the Sikkim government. They wanted to know about me and asked for identification. I spoke to them in Nepalese, which I knew fluently, so they thought I was from Nepal and allowed me to cross the border into Tibet. I was to face many more hardships in Tibet. I was a vegetarian, but could get little to eat except meat. I did not meet a single vegetarian in Tibet. Because of the climate and high altitude, everyone lived on meat and fish. Even I started eating eggs. I was also able to find a few seasonal vegetables, but I could not imagine eating meat and fish. Because of the change in my diet, I suffered from diarrhea, and my health deteriorated. But I was determined to visit certain monasteries and caves to fulfill my purpose of my journey, which was to stay with my master's master. Whenever I camped at night, people would check my belongings, apparently with the intention of robbing me, but I had nothing in my possession except a few pounds of biscuits, some gram, and a bottle of water, which was given to me by one of the soldiers who had posted at the border. I had 2,000 rupees, which was not much for such a journey, and I tied them inside my stockings. I would never take my shoes off before anyone. I would travel 10 or 15 miles per day, sometimes on foot, and sometimes on a mule. I would talk to the people I met about astrology and fortune-telling, although it bothered my conscience. But the Tibetans loved to hear about such things. When they discovered I knew something about these subjects, they became friendly and would gladly help me by providing mules to go from one mountain camp to another. Several times I came face to face with wild snow bears and huge bhotia dogs. These dogs are used for guarding the Tibetan villages. In spite of being tired and fatigued, as a result of all the problems I was encountering, I felt that there was a power calling me onward to learn more about the hidden teachings of the Himalayan sages. I never expected to return to India again, because the British government in India was sure to imprison me. I took courage and completed this tedious journey of crossing the mountain streams, glaciers, and passes without any pre-planning, resources, or guides. I surrendered myself to Providence and left my fate in the hands of my masters and Grandmaster, having complete faith that they would protect me and help me if I lost my way. During those days I was fearless. I was not afraid of death. My burning desire to see my Grandmaster was strong. I thought it was my prime duty to live with him for some time. He was in Tibet because of the solitude he wanted, and also to teach a few advanced yogis who were prepared and wanted him there. I was very anxious to meet him. I came to know from my master that Hariya Khan Baba and other sages of the Himalayas adored him. and studied with him for many years. Haria Khan Baba, who was very famous in the Kumayun hills, and who is considered by some to be the eternal Babaji of the Himalayas, was taught by my Grandmaster. This constantly strengthened my desire, which finally led me to this adventure. I reached Lhasa after 2 months of strenuous travel. I met a Catholic priest who lived there. He took me to his small house, which also served as his church, and which he shared with 2 other missionaries. These 3 were the only Catholic missionaries in Lhasa, and their activities were closely monitored by the Tibetan government. I lived with them for 10 days, resting and regaining my strength. By that time, the political officer in Sikkim and the police in India knew that I was in Tibet. My case was given over to the CID, that's the Central Intelligence Division. I met one of the lamas and convinced him that I was a spiritual man and did not have any political motives. I lived with this lama for 15 days, and he finally became convinced that I had nothing to do with any political movement in India. He assured me that I would not be deported from Tibet, and introduced me to some high government officials. Though I could not express myself well in their language, I succeeded in convincing them of my sincerity. The Lama with whom I had stayed in Lhasa was a close friend of another Lama, whose monastery was close to my destination. It was 75 miles northeast of Lhasa, far from civilization. My host provided some guides, who took me to the monastery. From there I would be able to make my way to the final goal of my journey. In that monastery there were more than 300 lamas. There are many monasteries in Tibet, having thousands of lamas from various traditions. Lamism seemed to me to be an individualistic religion mingled with Buddhism. Every lama had his own way of performing rituals and ceremonies, chanting, rotating the prayer wheel, and using mantras. These mantras were usually distorted versions of Sanskrit mantras. I had previously studied at Nalanda University in Bihar, an ancient Buddhist university in India, so I knew about many of the Buddhist beliefs and practices. I had studied Buddhism as it originated in India, and as it exists in Tibet, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. 1,000 years ago, a Tibetan scholar came to India, studied, and then took the scriptures back to Tibet. Many scholars from India then started going to Tibet to reach the Buddhist literature of India. I was fully aware of the various sects of Buddhism in Tibet, including those who believed in the existence of many gods and demons and accept Buddha as one of their gods. Tibetan Buddhism is inseparably mingled with Tantrism. Before going to see my Grandmaster, I visited another small monastery where I met a Lama who was supposed to be a great Tibetan yogi. What is called Tibetan yoga is actually a distorted form of Tantra, the part of Tantra which is called Vama Marga, the left-hand path. Those who follow this path believe in the use of wine, women, meat, fish, and mantra in their worship. When I met this Lama, he was seated in a wooden room surrounded by 7 women who were chanting mantras with him. After a few mantras, he would pick up and eat a piece of raw meat which was mixed with certain spices, including chili, and then continued chanting again. After 15 minutes the Lama stopped chanting and asked me the purpose of my visit. I smiled and said I had come to see him. He said, "No, no, that's not true. Your name is such and you are in disguise. The Sikkim police are searching for you." He said all this in an angry tone because he knew that I despised his way of worshipping and at the same time eating raw meat. He studied my thoughts, which terrified me. But I was not surprised that he could do this, because by this time I had already met several thought readers and knew the whole process of reading someone's thoughts. I became humble and said I was in his country only to learn more about Tantra. This yogi was a tantric and he gave me his book of worship to go through. But I had already read the scripture before. He led me to another Lama who was also a tantric. He knew the Hindi language fairly well because he had lived in India at Bodh Gaya, the place where Buddha was enlightened. Much of the literature found in Tibet is a translation of the Puranic stories of the Hindus. Some of that literature is Taoism and Confucianism mingled with Buddhism, but there is nothing systematic or philosophically original. My knowledge of the Tibetan language was very poor, but this Lama talked to me in Hindi, so it was easy for me to communicate with him concerning spiritual matters. I could communicate in Tibetan with regard to everyday necessities, but I could not independently go through the piles of handwritten manuscripts which were preserved in the various monasteries of Tibet. At the monastery where I was staying, a Sanskrit manuscript was being worshipped by the Lamas. It had a thick crust of sandal dust on the cloth in which it was wrapped. I was told that anyone who read this manuscript would immediately get leprosy and die. Many Lamas came to worship it, but no one had ever read it. I had a strong desire to look through the long, handmade leaves of that manuscript, but the Lama wouldn't accept any of my persuasions for allowing me to see it. All my efforts failed. I remembered a saying that goes, "The scriptures belong to those who study them, not to those fools who own them but do not know their contents." At 3 o'clock in the morning, I went to the interior of the monastery, where many lamps were burning, and I opened the manuscript, which was wrapped with 7 silken cloths. When I began reading it, I was surprised to see that it was a part of the Linga Purana, one of the 18 books containing thousands of spiritual stories, methods, and practices based on the ancient Vedic literature of India. I rewrapped it quickly and returned to my room. Since I had disturbed the position of the lamps and was unable to rewrap the manuscript accurately, it was quickly discovered that the book had been opened. I was rightly suspected. I told the Lama who spoke Hindi, "I have been assigned by the Himalayan masters to go through this, and if you say anything to me, you will suffer, and not me." Fortunately, this stopped the head Lama and the other Lamas. Otherwise they would have beaten me to death. I proved that nothing had happened to me after opening the forbidden book, and convinced them that this substantiated my claim that I was authorized to do so. They started a rumor about me, saying that a young Lama had come from Bodh Gaya with great power and wisdom. My Tibetan guides advised me to leave, so I proceeded to my destination. Sometimes utter ignorance in the path of spirituality is accepted as secret knowledge. People do not like to examine their blind beliefs. I had encountered fanaticism and blind faith before. When I finally met my Grandmaster, he embraced me, saying, "Oh, you are very tired. You have gone through many problems. The path of enlightenment is the toughest path, and that seeking is the hardest task." After he described my whole journey to me, he told me to bathe and refresh myself. I had been very disgusted with the long and tiring journey. All my practices and yoga disciplines had been neglected, and that was the worst thing for my inner condition. But suddenly, upon being embraced by my Grandmaster, I forgot all the pains and miseries I had gone through. The way he looked at me was the same as the look of my master. His compassion was indescribable. When great yogis and masters look at their disciples, the whole of their being starts radiating that love, which is superb and fulfilling. I had been told by my master that my Grandmaster was from a Brahmin family, that he had wandered in the Himalayan mountains since his early childhood, and that he came from an unbroken line of sages. He looked very old, but very healthy. He would get up from his seat once early in the morning and once early in the evening. His height was 5 feet 9 or 10 inches. He was very slim, but very energetic. He had bushy eyebrows, and his face glowed and radiated deep calmness and tranquillity. He had a perennial smile. He lived on yak's milk most of the time, and sometimes barley soup. Occasionally a few lamas would come and study with him. He lived in a natural cave at a height of 7,000 feet, and used fire to remove the dampness and to boil milk and water. His students made a wooden portico before the entrance of his cave. It was a beautiful place from which he could see the long mountain ranges and vast horizon. During my stay with the Grandmaster, I asked him questions on many advanced and rare practices, and I received replies to all my questions. After replying to many of my spiritual queries, he asked me why I was hesitating in not expressing my prime desire. With trembling voice I said, "Please convince me so that I understand the technique of Parakaya Pravesha." He said, "Okay." The next morning one of his Lama students came to see him. It was about 9 or 9:30 in the morning. My Grandmaster said, "I'm going to give you wisdom. I'm going to demonstrate for you." He said he could leave his body and enter someone else's body, and then come back to his own body again. He said he could change his body at will. The thought flashed in my mind, he wants to cast off his body, and wants me to immerse it, or bury it. But suddenly he said, "It's not that." He was replying to all my thoughts. He instructed me to go inside the cave and again check if there was any outlet or hidden door. But I had already lived in that small cave for more than a month, and I thought there was no point in checking the cave again. But he ordered me to go and examine that small cave again. I did as he ordered, and as I had seen before, It was a small rock cave with only one entrance, having a wooden portico outside. I came out and sat under the portico with a lama next to me. He told us to come nearer to him and hold a wooden plate which was like a round tea tray. When we held the tray, he said, "Do you see me?" We said, "Yes." In my ignorance I said, "Please don't try to hypnotize me. I won't look at your eyes." He said, "I am not hypnotizing you." His body started becoming hazy, and that haziness was a human form like a cloud. That hazy cloud, human form, started moving toward us. Soon, in a few seconds' time, the cloud disappeared. We found that the plate which we were holding started becoming heavier. After a few minutes, the wooden plate again became as light as it was before. For 10 minutes the Lama and I remained standing, holding that plate, and finally sat down, waiting in great suspense and awe for something to happen. After 10 or 15 minutes, the voice of my grandmother told me to get up and to hold that wooden plate again. When we held the plate, it started becoming heavier, and again the cloudy form reappeared in front of us. From the cloudy form he came back to his visible body. This amazing and unbelievable experience was a confirmation. He demonstrated this kriya, meaning action, once again in a similar manner. Perhaps that day will never come when I can speak about this to the world. I would like to do so because I feel that the world should know that such sages exist, and the researchers should start researching such secret signs. Miracles like this show that a human being has such abilities. And in the 3rd chapter of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, the codifier of yoga science, explains all the siddhis. I do not profess or claim that such siddhis are essential for self-enlightenment, but I want to say that human potentials are immense, and as the physical scientists are exploring the external world, the genuine yogis should not stop exploring the inner abilities and potentials. His way of teaching was very practical and straightforward. When I insisted on knowing about our tradition, he said, "In our external way of life, we come from Shankara's order, but actually our spiritual tradition is different from any institutional traditions existing in India." I also asked why he lived in Tibet and not in India. He answered, "It does not matter where I live. Here I have a few advanced students who are prepared and who practice under my guidance. In the future I might come to India." I often showered questions on him, exactly as I did with my master. He spoke very little, and answered me briefly with a smile, and then he closed his eyes. He would say, "Be still and quiet, and you will know without being told verbally. You should learn to see through your inner eye, and to hear through your inner ear." My diary is full of the instructions he gave me. He told me to cultivate more love by serving my disciples and students through meditation, speech, and action. I wondered how one could serve through meditation, and wanted to know more. He said, "The sages, yogis, and spiritual masters serve the world by going deep within to the central fountain of love, and expressing that love to the students without using any method of communication known so far to modern man. This, the finest of all communication, becomes very active in deep silence, and helps the student to resolve all fears, doubts, and problems. Any selfless wish experienced by the Master during that time is always fulfilled. I lived with my Grandmaster for several months doing sadhana, enjoying his divine presence, and learning a few methods of solar science and advanced techniques of rightist tantra. Solar science is one of the highest of the advanced yoga science, which can help humanity today by eliminating suffering. According to my Grandmaster, it involves a particular type of meditation on the solar plexus and is very beneficial for removing all obstacles created by physical and mental diseases. The solar system is the largest network in the human body, and its center is called Manipura chakra. There are various ways of meditating on this chakra, but by including advanced pranayama, solar science brings forward an awareness of a level of energy finer than the pranic level. At this level of energy, rhythms are studied by meditating either on the morning sun or the Udaragni, which is the internal center of fire. This fire is created by the friction of the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere, in which the Upanishads are called Upper Arani and Lower Arani. This healing science, though described in the Upanishads and known about by scholars, is understood in a practical way by very few. By learning this science, one can have absolute control over his three sheaths: physical, pranic, and mental. One who is adept in such knowledge can communicate and heal anyone, regardless of the distance between them. I also received a few important lessons from my Grandmaster on Sri Vidya, the highest of all sciences, and the mother of all mandalas found in Tibetan and Indian literature. In advanced practices, the student learns how to concentrate on different parts of Sri Yantra, and a few rare students learn to travel to the center. This yantra is considered to be a manifestation of divine power, and the bindu, or point in the center, is the center where Shakti and Shiva are united. Even after being initiated in this Vidya in the Malabar hills of India, my teacher there did not give me the practice of Bindu Bhedana, which means piercing the point. In this worship of the Divine Mother, the final knowledge imparted by the great sages is found. For this knowledge, a scriptural study is essential, but most essential is direct guidance of a master who is adept in this Vidya. There are very few people who know this, and they can be counted on the fingertips, though I do not know them all. Our tradition alone teaches this Vidya. If anyone is accomplished in this, then he is from our tradition. Having met my Grandmaster, and having received this knowledge, my purpose for visiting Tibet was fulfilled. One day, after 2.5 months of study with my Grandmaster, I was sitting outside our cave thinking about the diary in which I used to record my experiences. A thought flashed in my mind. I wish I had my diary here so I could note down a few experiences. My Grandmaster smiled and beckoned me to come to him. He said, "I can get your diary for you. Do you need it? Such a possibility was not a great miracle for me any more, for I had experienced such things before. I casually replied, "Yes, and a few pencils too." I had left my diary in India at a sanatorium called Bhawali, near the Nainital hills in North India. Suddenly 3 pencils and my diary, which was quite large, containing 475 pages, were before me. I was pleased, but not especially surprised. I told him that I preferred him to give me something spiritual. He laughed and said, "I have already given you that. You should learn to retain it without resistance or carelessness." Then he said, "My blessings are with you. Now I want you to go to Lhasa, and from there you should return to India." I said, "It is not possible for me to return to India. I will be arrested." He replied, "India will soon have independence. If you delay, the heavy snow and glaciers will prevent you from returning to India this year." I have not seen my Grandmaster again. Some time later, I heard that he bid goodbye to his close disciples and disappeared. Some people say that they last saw him sitting with garlands of flowers around his neck, floating on the current of Kali Ganga, a river which flows through Tanakpur. I have asked my master if he is still living in his mortal body, but my master just smiles in response and says, "That you will have to find out for yourself." Concerned about what would happen on my return, yet somewhat confident, I went to Lhasa with the help of the Lama who had earlier been my host. I left for India in June 1947. With the help of 2 mules and 2 guides, it took me a month to cross the snow-blanketed passes and reach Gangtok, the capital city of Sikkim. 3 days before I arrived, India's independence was declared. While in Gangtok, I lived in a monastery which still exists on the northeast side of the city. There I visited a Lama who was a remarkable man. He was a genuine Buddhist yogi and a learned Sanskrit scholar who had lived for many years in Bodh Gaya in India. Usually the scholars of Buddhism criticize Shankara, just as Swamis from the order of Shankaracharya criticize Buddhism. But this wise man, citing references from many texts, taught me a synthesis of Buddhism and Shankara's Advaita system. Shankara was a great yogi philosopher and a dynamic young avatar, meaning incarnation of God, who systematized and organized the Advaita, meaning non-dualist system. Although the codifier of this system was Gaudapada Acharya. He said, "There is no difference between these systems of philosophy as far as the ultimate reality is concerned. There are verbal differences, but no experiential differences. Cast off all sectarian influences and attain the highest state of consciousness or nirvana." He was sad to know that followers of Buddhism in India, Tibet, China, Japan, and the whole of Southeast Asia had forgotten the meditative tradition of self-enlightenment and had again fallen back toward ritualistic patterns, although this was not the way of Buddha. The unalloyed Buddhism which can help the modern world has all been lost. In thousands of temples, Buddhist lamas, priests, and monks are performing rituals, while Buddha said, "Ye, light thy own lamp. No one will give you salvation. Realize thyself." Attain nirvana, and thou art Buddha thyself. The Lama also criticized the Advaitins, the followers of Shankara, for indulging in rituals and for not teaching Advaita philosophy properly. He said, such teachings are creating confusion in the world. Then he explained, Shankara's philosophy is a synthesis of Vedic philosophy and Buddhism. He quoted the Vedas saying, Asavada idam agra asit, which means this visible universe has come out of the void. He quoted several other scriptures and compared the philosophy of the Mandukya Upanishad with the Sankhya Karika of Ishwara Krishna, who was a Buddhist scholar. After tutoring me for several days, he suggested that I leave the monastery and return to my master in the Himalayas. Preparing to tear the veil. Each student has his own image of what a teacher should be. If you come to me, you are not prepared to see me as I am. Since your expectations are not fulfilled, you decide that I am not a good teacher. This is not the proper way to approach a teacher. Approach with determination and a burning desire to learn. Then there will be no problem. How will you find the right master? There is a saying in the scriptures, when the disciple is prepared, the master appears. If you are not prepared, he will be there, but you won't notice or respond. If you do not know what a diamond is, the diamond may be there, but you ignore it and pass it by, taking it to be just a piece of glass. Further, if you do not know the difference, you may acquire a piece of glass, think that it is a diamond, and cherish it your whole life. During the period of seeking, the student may become too intellectual, ignoring sahaja bhava, meaning spontaneous intuition, or conversely, he may become too emotional, ignoring his reason. An emotional trip is as dangerous as an intellectual trip which feeds the ego. Those who do not believe in discipline should not expect enlightenment. No master can or will give it to them just because they want it. A genuine spiritual teacher, one who is assigned to teach according to tradition, searches out good students. He looks for certain signs and symptoms. He wants to know who is prepared. No student can fool a master. The master easily perceives how well the student is prepared. If he finds that the student is not yet ready, he will gradually prepare him for the higher teachings. And when the wick and oil are properly prepared, the master lights the lamp. That is his role. The resulting light is divine. We should not worry about who will guide us. The important question is, am I prepared to be guided? Jesus had only 12 close disciples. He helped many, but he imparted the secret wisdom only to those few who were prepared. The Sermon on the Mount is comprehended only by a few, not by the multitudes. Those not on the path do not understand, for example, why one should be meek and poor. The Master's ways of teaching are many, and sometimes mysterious. He teaches through speech and actions, but in some cases he may teach without any verbal communication at all. I have often felt that the most important teachings have their source in intuition, and are beyond the powers of verbal communication. You should do your duty in the world with love, and that alone will contribute significantly to your progress on the path of enlightenment. You do not need one who can guide and help you. You need an external guru as a means to attain the guru within you. Sometimes you may become egotistical and decide, I don't need a guru. That is ego talking. You must tame it. You'll never meet a bad guru if you are a good student. But the reverse is also true. If you are a bad student, you won't meet a good guru. Why should a good guru assume responsibility for a bad student? Nobody collects garbage. If you are in search of a guru, search within first. To become a yogi means to know your own condition here and now, to work with yourself. Don't grumble because you don't have a teacher. Ask whether you deserve one. Are you capable of attracting a teacher? Once, when I complained to my master that he was not teaching me, he said, "Come on, I'll be your disciple for the time being. You become the teacher. Act exactly as I have." I told him, "Sir, I do not know what to do." He said, "Don't worry, you'll know." So he came to me with his eyes closed, carrying a bowl which had a big hole in it, and he said, "Teacher, give me something." I asked, "How's it possible for me to give you anything? Your bowl has a big hole in it." Then he opened his eyes and said, "You have a hole in your head, and you want something from me? Increase your capacity. Purify yourself. Acquire that gentle strength within. God will come and say to you, I want to enter this living temple that you are. Prepare yourself for that situation. Remove the impurities, and you will find that he who wants to know reality is himself the source of reality." Of the many swamis and teachers, of all faiths whom I have known, only a few have been fully enlightened. I once raised this problem with my master. I said, "Sir, so many people are called Swami or sage. The people of the world are cheated. Why are there so many inadequate teachers who aren't really ready to be teachers, who themselves should still be students?" He smiled and said, "Do you know a garden of flowers often has a fence or a hedge around it to protect it? These people are the hedge created for us by the Lord. Let them pretend. One day they will in fact become fully realized. For now they are only cheating themselves. If you want to meet a genuine and fully knowledgeable teacher, you must first prepare yourself. Then you will be able to pass through the hedge."